Jack was tired. He had spent weeks traveling alone in his small spaceship, delivering supplies between far-off colonies. Today, however, his luck seemed to change. His navigation system picked up a strange signal from a nearby planet. It wasn't on any maps, but the signal was steady and clear. His curiosity got the better of him. As he descended through the atmosphere, he saw something unexpected. A small, cozy house sitting in the middle of a lush green valley. It looked nothing like the cold, metallic structures he was used to seeing in human colonies or alien outposts. Smoke rose gently from the chimney, and colorful flowers surrounded the yard. It looked peaceful. When Jack landed his ship nearby, the door of the house creaked open. Out stepped someone, or something, he didn't expect. It was an old alien woman, short and round, wearing an apron and holding a tray of cookies. Her skin was a light purple, her large eyes sparkled with kindness, and her voice was warm. "Welcome, traveler," she said with a smile. "You must be hungry after your journey. Come in and have some cookies." Jack hesitated. This was weird. Really weird. He had seen a lot of strange things in space, but this was new. Who was this alien granny? And why was she acting so normal? Still, his stomach growled, and the cookies smelled amazing. "Ah, thanks," he said, stepping forward cautiously. "Who are you?" "You can call me Granny," she replied, waving him inside. "Don't worry, you're safe here." The inside of her house was just as surprising as the outside. It looked like a human grandmother's home, with wooden furniture, knitted blankets, and shelves lined with jars of spices and herbs. A soft fire crackled in the fireplace. The cookies on the tray were golden brown and perfectly round. Jack sat down at the table, and Granny placed the tray in front of him. "Eat up," she said cheerfully. "They're fresh from the oven." He picked one up, still warm, and took a bite. The flavor was unlike anything he had ever tasted. Sweet, but not too sweet. Soft, but with just the right amount of crunch. For a moment, he forgot all his doubts. These were the best cookies he had ever eaten. "This is amazing," he said, taking another bite. "What's in these?" Granny chuckled. "Oh, just a little bit of this and that. A special recipe, you could say." Jack noticed something strange as he ate. He felt lighter. His tiredness vanished, and his mind felt sharper. It was as if the cookies had energy baked into them. He looked at Granny, who was watching him with a knowing smile. "What's in these cookies?" he asked again, this time more seriously. Granny didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down across from him and folded her hands. "The cookies are just the beginning," she said softly. "If you stay a little longer, I'll show you something even better." Jack frowned. "What do you mean?" Granny's smile widened. "There's more to this world than you think, young man. These cookies are made with something special, something your kind hasn't discovered yet. But I can't explain it all at once. It's something you have to see for yourself." Jack's instincts kicked in. Was this some kind of trick? He glanced toward the door, but Granny raised her hand. "If I wanted to harm you, I wouldn't have offered you cookies," she said calmly. "I only ask for a little of your time. Stay, and you might learn something that could change your life." Her words hung in the air, and Jack felt conflicted. On one hand, this was strange and potentially dangerous. On the other hand, his curiosity was burning. What was she talking about? What made these cookies so special? And what could she possibly show him? Before he could decide, Granny stood up and walked to the window. "You've traveled far, Jack," she said, looking out at the valley. "I can see it in your eyes. You're searching for something, even if you don't know what it is. Maybe I can help you find it." Jack froze. He hadn't told her his name. "How do you know who I am?" he demanded, standing up. Granny turned to him with a gentle smile. "I know many things," she said simply. "Sit down, eat another cookie, and let me tell you a story." Jack leaned back in his chair, still clutching the half-eaten cookie. His mind raced with questions. How did Granny know his name? What was this mysterious recipe she mentioned? And why did the cookies make him feel so alive? Granny watched him closely, her large eyes calm but knowing. "You're not the first traveler to find their way here," she said, breaking the silence. "And you won't be the last." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean? You knew I was coming." "Not exactly," Granny replied, her tone light. "But I've been expecting someone. Someone like you." Jack didn't like the sound of that. Someone like me. What does that even mean? Granny didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up and walked over to one of the shelves, pulling down a large jar filled with small glowing crystals. The light they emitted was soft, almost soothing, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were somehow alive. "These," Granny said, holding the jar up for him to see, "are the secret to my cookies. They're not from this planet, not even from this galaxy. They're something far older, far more special." Jack stared at the crystals, his curiosity growing despite himself. "What are they?" "Some kind of energy source." Granny chuckled. "You could say that, but they're much more than that. These crystals are the essence of life itself. They hold memories, emotions, connections. When you eat one, it doesn't just nourish your body. It connects you to everything around you." Jack's stomach tightened. "Are you saying I just ate that?" "Only a tiny fragment," Granny said with a smile. "Enough to give you a taste of their power. But the real question is, do you want to know more?" Jack hesitated. Every part of him screamed that this was a bad idea. He didn't know this alien, didn't trust her. And yet, something about her felt genuine. And those cookies had awakened something in him, a sharpness, a clarity he'd never felt before. "What happens if I say yes?" he asked cautiously. Granny set the jar down and returned to her seat. "If you say yes, I'll show you how the crystals work. But it won't be easy. You'll have to earn their trust." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Earn their trust? They're just rocks." Granny's smile faded slightly. "That's where you're wrong. These crystals are alive in ways you can't yet understand. They choose who is worthy of their gifts. If they accept you, they'll change your life. If they don't..." She trailed off, her gaze distant. Jack leaned forward. "If they don't, what?" Granny shook her head. "Let's not worry about that just yet. For now, I have a simple task for you. If you complete it, the crystals will decide whether or not you're ready for the next step." Jack frowned. "What kind of task?" Granny stood and gestured for him to follow. She led him to the back of the house, where a small wooden door creaked open to reveal a lush, glowing forest. The trees shimmered with the same light as the crystals, and the air hummed with energy. It was beautiful, but also unnerving. "Somewhere in this forest," Granny said, "is a single seed. It glows brighter than anything else here. Your task is to find it and bring it back to me." Jack looked out at the forest, his heart pounding. "That's it? Just find a seed?" Granny nodded. "It's not as simple as it sounds. The forest is alive, and it will test you. It knows your fears, your weaknesses. If you want the crystal's gift, you'll have to prove yourself." Jack hesitated. Every instinct told him to walk away, to return to his ship and leave this strange planet behind. But something deeper, something he couldn't explain, pushed him forward. "Fine," he said, stepping into the forest. "I'll find your seed." As soon as he entered, the door shut behind him, and the forest seemed to come alive. The trees swayed gently, even though there was no wind. Strange whispers filled the air, words he couldn't quite make out. The ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse, as if the forest had a heartbeat. Jack pressed on, his eyes scanning the glowing foliage for any sign of the seed. But as he moved deeper, the whispers grew louder. They weren't random anymore. They were calling his name. "Jack." He froze. The voice was soft, almost soothing, but it sent a chill down his spine. He turned, but there was no one there. "Jack, you don't belong here." The voice came again, And this time it was closer. Jack's hands tightened into fists. "Who's there?" he demanded. No answer. Only the sound of footsteps crunching leaves behind him. Jack spun around, and for the first time, he saw them. Shadowy figures moving between the trees. Their forms were blurred, like they were made of smoke, but their eyes glowed with the same light as the crystals. "Who are you?" Jack shouted, his voice echoing in the forest. The figures didn't answer. Instead, they moved closer, their eyes fixed on him. Jack's heart raced. He didn't know what they were, but he knew he didn't want to find out. He turned and ran, his breath coming in short gasps as the whispers grew louder. The forest seemed to shift around him, the trees closing in to block his path. But then, through the chaos, he saw it, a small glowing seed sitting on a patch of moss. Jack dove for it, his fingers closing around the seed just as the shadows reached him. The moment he touched it, a surge of energy shot through his body, and the shadows stopped. They didn't retreat, but they didn't come closer either. The whispers faded, replaced by a single clear voice in his mind. "You've been chosen. For now." Before Jack could process the words, the forest began to dissolve around him. Moments later, he found himself back at Granny's door, the seed clutched tightly in his hand. Granny opened the door and smiled. "Well done," she said softly. "But this is just the beginning." Jack stood at Granny's doorstep, the glowing seed clutched tightly in his hand. His chest heaved from the effort of running through the strange, shifting forest. He wanted answers, needed them. The shadows, the whispers, the seed. It was all too much. Granny stepped aside, motioning for him to enter. "You've done well," she said warmly, as if he'd just completed a simple chore. "Come in, and let's see what you've brought." Jack hesitated, glancing over his shoulder at the forest. The trees were still now, as if nothing had happened. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, waiting. "Relax," Granny said, as though reading his thoughts. "You're safe here. The forest doesn't interfere once you've been accepted." Jack stepped inside, and Granny gently closed the door behind him. The cozy warmth of her home felt almost surreal after the chaos outside. She gestured to the table, where a small empty bowl sat. "Place the seed here," she instructed. Jack obeyed, carefully setting the seed down. It pulsed faintly, as if it had its own heartbeat. Granny leaned in, studying it with a critical eye. "Perfect," she murmured. "This seed holds potential, raw, untapped energy. But to unlock its true power, it needs to be shaped. And that, my dear boy, is where you come in." Jack frowned. "What do you mean, shaped? I don't even know what this thing is." Granny straightened and smiled. "That's the beauty of it. The seed reflects its creator. It becomes what you make of it. But first, we must begin the test." Jack groaned. "Another test? Haven't I done enough?" Granny chuckled softly. "Oh, my dear, the forest was merely the introduction. The real challenge lies ahead." She led him to a workbench at the back of the room. It was cluttered with tools, some familiar, others completely alien. There were hammers that floated midair, chisels that glowed, and brushes that seemed to hum when touched. Granny picked up a small, delicate tool that looked like a cross between a scalpel and a laser pen. "This," she said, holding it out to him, "is your key to unlocking the seed's power. But the process requires focus, intention, and most importantly, balance." Jack took the tool reluctantly. It felt warm in his hand, as if it recognized him. "And what happens if I screw up?" Granny's expression turned serious. "If you fail, the seed will reject you. And the consequences, well, let's just say it's better not to find out." Jack's grip tightened on the tool. "No pressure, huh?" Granny stepped back, giving him space. "Take your time. Trust your instincts. The seed will guide you if you let it." Jack stared at the seed, its glow steady and inviting. He took a deep breath and began. The tool emitted a thin beam of light as he traced patterns into the seed's surface. At first, the process felt awkward, but soon he fell into a rhythm. The glow of the seed seemed to respond to his movements, growing brighter with each precise cut. As he worked, strange images began to flash in his mind. Memories of his childhood, his first flight into space, the people he'd lost along the way. The images weren't random. They felt deliberate, as if the seed was pulling them from his mind. "Granny," he said without looking up, "why am I seeing these things?" "The seed is connecting with you," she explained. "It's learning who you are, what drives you. This is part of the process. Don't fight it. Embrace it." Jack wasn't sure how to feel about that, but he kept going. The images shifted, becoming more abstract. He saw Earth, shining blue and green, surrounded by darkness. He saw alien worlds, vast and vibrant. And then he saw something else, something that made his heart skip a beat. The shadows from the forest. They stood at the edge of his vision, watching silently. But this time, they weren't just shadows. He could see faint, humanoid shapes within the smoke. Their eyes glowed brighter, and he felt their presence more strongly than before. "Granny," he said, his voice shaking. "They're here." The shadows. Granny's face darkened. "The Watchers," she said quietly. "They are always watching." "Why?" Jack demanded. "What do they want from me?" "They are the guardians of the crystals," Granny replied. "They test those who seek their power. They've been observing you since you arrived, and now they're waiting to see if you're worthy." Jack's hands trembled, but he forced himself to keep working. The tool moved faster now, carving intricate designs into the seed. The glow intensified, filling the room with a brilliant light. The Watchers drew closer, their forms becoming clearer. Jack felt a sudden surge of fear. What happens if they decide I'm not worthy? Granny didn't answer. Her silence was enough. Finally, with one last stroke of the tool, the seed split open. A wave of energy erupted from it, knocking Jack back. He hit the floor, dazed, as the glow enveloped the room. The Watchers stopped, their glowing eyes fixed on the seed. For a moment, everything was still. Then one of the Watchers stepped forward, its form solidifying. It reached out, its smoky hand hovering above the seed. The glow dimmed, and the room grew quiet. Jack held his breath, waiting for the verdict. The Watcher turned to him, its voice echoing in his mind. "You have been chosen, but the path ahead will not be easy." Before Jack could respond, the Watchers dissolved into smoke and vanished. The seed now rested in the bowl, transformed into a crystalline object that pulsed with energy. Granny smiled. "Congratulations," she said softly. "You've passed the test. But this is only the beginning." Jack sat at the table, staring at the transformed seed. It was no longer the small, glowing fragment he had found in the forest. Now it resembled a crystalline orb, shimmering with colors he couldn't describe. It pulsed faintly, like a living thing. His chest still heaved from the encounter with the Watchers, and his mind raced with questions. Granny, ever calm, moved around the room, tidying up as though nothing unusual had just occurred. She glanced at Jack, her eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and caution. "You've done well, Jack. Few make it this far." Jack's throat was dry, his voice shaky. "What were those things? The Watchers. What do they want from me?" Granny sighed and sat across from him, folding her hands on the table. "The Watchers are the guardians of the crystal's power. They test those who seek to use it, ensuring only the worthy proceed." Jack shook his head, his frustration boiling over. "Worthy? Worthy of what? I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't even know this place existed until I landed here." Granny's smile faded, replaced by a solemn expression. "The crystals don't call just anyone, Jack. Whether you realize it or not, you've been chosen. There's something in you that the crystals recognize. Potential, strength, perhaps even a touch of defiance. But the path you're on now is not one you can walk halfway. You must decide if you're willing to see it through." Jack leaned back, running a hand through his hair. And what if I don't? What if I decide to leave and never look back? Granny's eyes darkened. If you turn away now, the Watchers will not let you go easily. They see rejection as failure, and failure comes at a cost. A chill ran down Jack's spine. What kind of cost? Granny didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the forest. The Watchers aren't just guardians, she said softly. They're collectors. When someone fails the test, their essence, their very being, is taken and bound to the crystals. That's how the Watchers came to be. Jack's heart sank. You're saying, they were once like me? Granny nodded. Travelers, dreamers, explorers. Each one thought they could walk away. But the crystals demand commitment, Jack. You've already been marked as a candidate. The moment you touched the seed, your fate was sealed. Jack stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. I didn't sign up for any of this. You dragged me into this madness. Granny turned to him, her expression unflinching. I didn't drag you into anything, Jack. The crystals called you. I only offered guidance. But now you must decide. Do you continue forward, or do you risk becoming like the Watchers? Jack's mind raced. He wanted to scream, to argue, but deep down, he knew she was right. Something about the crystals had drawn him in, had awakened something inside him. And the thought of ending up like the shadowy figures terrified him. What happens if I keep going? He asked, his voice quieter now. Granny's expression softened. If you continue, you'll face challenges far greater than anything you've encountered so far. The crystal's power is vast, but it comes with responsibilities. You'll be tested in ways you can't yet imagine. And if you succeed, you'll be changed. Changed how? Jack asked. Granny hesitated, then returned to the table. The crystals enhance those who prove themselves worthy. They amplify your strengths, your abilities, your connection to the universe. But it's not without sacrifice. You may lose parts of yourself along the way, pieces you didn't even realize were important. Jack stared at the crystalline orb on the table. Its glow seemed to beckon him, pulling at something deep within. He clenched his fists. Do I even have a choice? Granny tilted her head, her smile returning faintly. There's always a choice, Jack. But the question is, can you live with the consequences? Jack sank back into his chair, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He thought of Earth, of the people he'd left behind, of the long, lonely journeys between stars. What was he searching for out here? Adventure? Purpose? He didn't know anymore. After a long silence, he looked up at Granny. What's the next step? Granny's eyes sparkled with approval. You'll need to learn how to use the crystal. But first, you'll need to rest. The challenges ahead will test you in ways you're not ready for yet. Jack nodded reluctantly, exhaustion finally catching up to him. Fine, I'll stay. But if this turns into another one of your tests, I'm out. Granny chuckled. Fair enough. Rest now, Jack. Tomorrow, we begin the real work. As Jack lay down on the small cot Granny had prepared for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was no longer his own. The crystal's glow filled the room, a constant reminder of the path he had chosen. And in the shadows just beyond the window, the Watchers lingered, their glowing eyes ever watchful. Jack woke to the sound of soft humming. At first, he thought it was Granny singing to herself, but as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, he realized the sound was coming from the crystal orb. It sat on the table, glowing faintly, its hum steady and rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Granny was already up, moving around the room with an energy that belied her age. She noticed Jack stirring and smiled warmly. Good morning, Jack. Did you sleep well? Jack rubbed his eyes and sat up. If you can call dreaming about shadow monsters and glowing seeds sleeping, then sure. Granny chuckled. Dreams are just another way the crystals communicate. They're showing you glimpses of what's to come. Jack frowned. Glimpses of what? More danger. More tests. Granny didn't answer directly. Instead, she gestured to the crystal. Today, you'll learn to connect with it. The crystal holds incredible power, but it won't simply give it to you. You must earn its trust, just as you did in the forest. Jack stood and approached the table cautiously. The crystal's glow seemed to brighten as he got closer, and the humming grew louder. He hesitated, glancing back at Granny. "And how exactly do I do that?" Granny's expression grew serious. "You must open your mind to it. Let it see who you are, your thoughts, your fears, your memories. It's not an easy process, and it can be overwhelming. But if you succeed, the crystal will grant you a connection to something far greater than yourself." Jack crossed his arms. "You make it sound like the crystal's alive." "In many ways, it is," Granny said. "It's not just an object, Jack. It's a conduit, a bridge to the fabric of the universe. Through it, you'll gain insight, strength, and perhaps even a purpose." Jack wasn't sure he liked the sound of that. But at this point, he felt there was no turning back. He reached out and placed his hand on the crystal. The moment his fingers touched its surface, the world around him dissolved. Jack found himself standing in an endless void. It wasn't dark or light, but something in between, a shimmering gray that seemed to stretch infinitely in every direction. He felt weightless, yet his feet were firmly planted on something solid. "Where am I?" he muttered. A voice answered, not aloud but directly in his mind. "You are within the crystal's memory. Here you will see what was, what is, and what could be." Jack spun around, but there was no one there. "Who's speaking?" "I am the crystal. I am the bridge between worlds, the keeper of knowledge, the guide for those who seek connection." Jack's heart raced. "You're alive. Not in the way you understand life. I am a vessel, a tool, a key. And you are the wielder. But first, you must prove yourself." Before Jack could respond, the void around him shifted. Images began to form, flickering like holograms. He saw Earth, beautiful and vibrant, but then the image darkened. Fires raged, cities crumbled, and humanity fought desperately for survival. He saw alien worlds thriving, then falling into chaos. The scenes moved faster and faster, a blur of destruction, hope, and renewal. "Stop," Jack shouted. "What is this?" The voice replied calmly. "These are the possibilities, the futures that may come to pass. Your actions will shape which path is taken." "My actions?" Jack demanded. "I'm just one guy. How am I supposed to change anything?" The images froze, and the voice grew softer. "Even the smallest ripple can create a wave. You have been chosen not because you are perfect, but because you have the potential to rise above your fears and limitations. Do you accept this responsibility?" Jack hesitated. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, but something inside him, something he couldn't explain, pushed him forward. I don't know if I can, but I'll try." The voice responded with a faint warmth. "That is enough. For now." The void shifted again, and Jack found himself standing on the surface of an alien planet. The air was thick, the sky a deep violet, and towering structures of crystal stretched toward the heavens. It was breathtakingly beautiful, but eerily silent. "This place," Jack began, but he was interrupted by a sudden tremor. The ground beneath him shook, and the crystal towers began to hum, their glow intensifying. Shadows emerged from the cracks in the ground, twisting and writhing as they moved toward him. "The Watchers," Jack whispered, his heart pounding. The voice returned. "They are the remnants of those who failed. They seek to reclaim what they lost. You must stand against them." "Stand against them? With what?" Jack shouted. "I don't have anything. You have the crystal. Focus. Trust the connection." Jack closed his eyes, gripping the orb tightly. He concentrated, reaching deep within himself for the connection Granny had spoken of. At first, there was nothing. But then he felt it, a surge of energy, a warmth that spread through his body. When he opened his eyes, his hands glowed with the same light as the crystal. The shadows recoiled, hissing angrily. Jack raised his hands, and a wave of energy shot out, scattering the watchers. The tremors stopped, and the crystal towers returned to their soft glow. Jack stood there, panting, as the voice spoke once more. "You have taken the first step, but the journey ahead will not be easy. Prepare yourself, Jack. The true test is yet to come." Jack blinked and found himself back in Granny's house, the crystal still humming softly under his hand. Granny smiled at him, her eyes filled with pride. "You've made the connection, but this is only the beginning." Jack exhaled shakily. "I get the feeling you've said that before." Granny laughed. "I have. And I'll say it again. Rest now, Jack. Tomorrow, your real training begins." As Jack sat down, his mind buzzed with the images he'd seen. The weight of his responsibility was heavy, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of hope. Whatever lay ahead, he was determined to face it. The next morning, Jack woke with a strange sense of clarity. The lingering connection to the crystal seemed to echo in his mind, like a faint melody he couldn't quite shake. Granny was already awake, her hands busy mixing something in a large wooden bowl. The smell of herbs and something sweet filled the room. "Good morning," she said without looking up. "I trust your journey into the crystal's memory was enlightening." Jack rubbed his temples. "That's one way to put it. If by enlightening you mean terrifying, then yeah, it was great." Granny chuckled. "The crystal shows only what you're ready to see. It reveals possibilities, not certainties. Your choices will determine which path comes to pass." Jack frowned, leaning against the table. "Yeah, about that. This whole chosen one thing. I'm not sure I'm cut out for it. I'm just a guy trying to get by, not some hero who saves the galaxy." Granny stopped mixing and looked at him, her expression serious. "Jack, no one is ever truly ready when the moment comes. Heroes are not born. They're shaped by their decisions. You've been given a gift, and with it, a responsibility." Jack sighed. "You keep saying that, but what does it actually mean? What do the crystals want from me?" Granny set down her bowl and walked over to the table. She placed her hands on the crystal, and its glow intensified. "The crystals are more than just tools, Jack. They're a bridge to a greater understanding of the universe. They amplify what is already within you, your strengths, your fears, your potential. And they offer you a choice." Jack's stomach tightened. "A choice?" Granny nodded. "The crystal has chosen you as a conduit for its power. With it, you can shape the fate of not just yourself, but countless others. You can protect, create, and guide. But there's a price." Jack narrowed his eyes. "What kind of price?" Granny's gaze softened. "The crystals demand commitment, Jack. Once you accept their power, you can't turn back. It will change you in ways you may not fully understand. You may lose parts of yourself, your humanity, your past. But in return, you'll gain something far greater." Jack's mind raced. The idea of losing himself, of becoming something other than human, was terrifying. But the memory of the visions, Earth in ruins, alien worlds falling into chaos, burned in his mind. Could he really walk away, knowing what was at stake? "What happens if I say no?" he asked quietly. Granny's expression darkened. "If you reject the crystal's gift, the Watchers will see it as a failure. And failure is not something they tolerate. You've seen what they are, Jack. Do you want to become one of them?" Jack shuddered at the thought. The Watchers, with their hollow eyes and shifting forms, were a fate worse than death. But the alternative wasn't much better. How could he make a choice like this? Granny seemed to sense his hesitation. She picked up the crystal and placed it in his hands. "Feel its weight, Jack. Listen to its hum. This is not just a burden, it's an opportunity. You've already proven yourself worthy. The crystal believes in you. Now you must decide if you believe in yourself." Jack stared at the crystal, its light casting soft patterns on his skin. It felt warm, alive, as though it were waiting for him to make his choice. He closed his eyes, letting the hum resonate through him. Images from the crystal's memory flashed in his mind again. The destruction, the hope, the countless lives hanging in the balance. Finally, he opened his eyes. If I do this, if I accept the crystal's power, what happens next? Granny smiled, relief flickering in her eyes. You'll become something more, Jack. A guardian, a guide. The crystal will give you strength, insight, and a connection to the universe that few ever experience. But you'll also face challenges greater than anything you've known. Jack nodded slowly. And if I fail? Granny's smile faded. Then the Watchers will claim what's left of you. The weight of her words settled over him, but Jack didn't flinch. He had come too far to turn back now. He tightened his grip on the crystal, its hum growing louder as though it sensed his resolve. I'll do it, he said firmly. I don't know if I can handle it, but I'll try. Granny's smile returned, brighter this time. That's all the crystal asks, Jack. Effort, not perfection. She placed her hand over his, and the crystal began to glow brighter. The hum intensified, filling the room with a resonant energy. Jack felt a surge of warmth spread through his body, followed by a sharp, searing pain. He gasped, but Granny's voice steadied him. Breathe, Jack. Let it in. The pain will pass. He clenched his teeth, focusing on her words. Slowly, the pain subsided, replaced by a deep, overwhelming connection. It was as if he could feel the pulse of the universe, the stars, the planets, the endless web of life and energy that bound everything together. When the light finally dimmed, Jack opened his eyes. The crystal in his hands was no longer glowing. Its energy now coursed through him, a part of him. Granny stepped back, her eyes filled with pride. You've taken the first step, Jack. The crystal is now a part of you. But the journey is far from over. Jack stood, his body tingling with newfound energy. What now? Granny's expression turned serious. Now you face the ultimate challenge. The crystal has given you its gift, but there are those who will seek to take it from you. You must protect it, Jack, not just for yourself, but for all who depend on it. Jack's jaw tightened. He didn't fully understand what lay ahead, but for the first time, he felt ready. The path before him was uncertain, but he was determined to see it through. Let them come, he said, his voice steady. I'm ready. Granny smiled. Good, because this is just the beginning. Jack stood in the doorway of Granny's house, staring out at the forest. The crystal's energy thrummed inside him, a constant reminder of the transformation he'd undergone. He could feel its presence in every fiber of his being, as though it had fused with his very soul. Behind him, Granny watched silently, her expression unreadable. This is it, isn't it? Jack said, his voice quiet. The part where I leave and everything changes. Granny stepped forward, her hands clasped in front of her. The crystal's power is now yours, Jack, but with it comes great responsibility. The universe will test you, challenge you, and try to break you. But you must hold strong. Remember what you've seen, what you've learned. Jack turned to face her, his eyes filled with uncertainty. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail? Granny placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. You've already faced the Watchers, delved into the crystal's memory, and embraced its gift. You're stronger than you think, Jack. But the true strength lies in your choices. Trust yourself and trust the crystal. He nodded, though doubt still lingered in the back of his mind. The journey ahead was unknown, and the weight of his newfound power was almost too much to bear. But deep down, he knew he couldn't turn back now. Granny handed him a small, intricately carved pendant. It glowed faintly, a fragment of the crystal embedded at its center. Take this, she said. It's a piece of the crystal, a reminder of what you carry within you. It will guide you when the path seems unclear. Jack slipped the pendant around his neck, feeling its warmth against his chest. Thank you, Granny, for everything. Granny smiled, her eyes twinkling with pride. No need for thanks, Jack. Just promise me one thing. Don't let the darkness consume you. There will be moments when the burden feels unbearable, but remember, you're never truly alone. The crystal will always be with you." With a final nod, Jack stepped out into the forest. The trees seemed less menacing now, their glow soft and welcoming. The whispers were gone, replaced by a soothing hum that matched the rhythm of the crystal within him. As he made his way back to his ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching him, not with malice, but with quiet approval. The journey back. When Jack reached his ship, it felt foreign to him, as though it belonged to a different life. The sleek metallic frame and cold, lifeless interior were a stark contrast to the vibrant, living energy of Granny's world. He climbed aboard and powered up the engines, the familiar hum of the ship's systems grounding him. As the ship lifted off, Jack glanced out the window. Granny stood at the edge of the forest, her figure small but resolute. She raised a hand in farewell, and for a moment, Jack felt a pang of sadness. He had come to trust her, to rely on her guidance. Now he was on his own. The ship broke through the planet's atmosphere, and the endless expanse of space stretched out before him. Jack set a course for Earth, his hand steady on the controls. But as he traveled, the crystal's energy began to stir within him, pulling his attention away from the stars. The vision. Jack closed his eyes, allowing the crystal to guide him. Images flooded his mind, scenes of Earth, its people thriving and struggling in equal measure. He saw his homeworld not as a distant observer, but as a part of its living essence. He felt its pain, its hope, its infinite potential. But then the vision shifted. He saw a shadow falling over Earth, a force unlike anything he had ever encountered. Alien ships, massive and foreboding, descended upon the planet, their intentions clear: destruction, conquest, annihilation. Humanity's survival hung by a thread. Jack's eyes snapped open, his breath coming in short gasps. The crystal's energy pulsed within him, urgent and insistent. He knew what it was telling him. This was the challenge he had been chosen for, the test that would define his purpose. The arrival. When Jack finally reached Earth, the vision had already begun to unfold. The alien fleet loomed on the horizon, their presence undeniable. Cities were in chaos, humanity scrambling to defend itself against an enemy it didn't understand. Jack landed his ship on the outskirts of a small town, stepping out to find frightened faces staring back at him. People whispered, pointing at the pendant around his neck, its glow unmistakable. Word spread quickly. He was different, a beacon of hope in the midst of despair. The crystal's energy guided him, showing him how to use its power. With a wave of his hand, he created shields to protect the townspeople. With a thought, he sent pulses of energy to disrupt the alien ship systems. The people began to rally around him, their fear replaced by determination. The turning point. As the battle raged on, Jack realized that his power alone wasn't enough. The crystal's strength was vast, but it couldn't save humanity without humanity's own resolve. He stood before a crowd, his voice steady and firm. "This isn't just my fight," he said. "It's ours. The crystal chose me to lead, but I can't do this alone. Together, we can stand against the darkness. Together, we can protect our home." The people cheered, their courage reignited. Under Jack's guidance, they began to organize, to fight back with everything they had. The alien fleet, once unstoppable, began to falter. The new beginning. When the last alien ship retreated, Jack stood amidst the ruins of the battlefield, his body exhausted but his spirit unbroken. The crystal's energy pulsed gently, a reminder of the journey he had undertaken and the challenges yet to come. Granny's words echoed in his mind, "You're never truly alone." He looked around at the faces of those he had saved, at the hope that now burned brightly in their eyes. For the first time, he understood the true purpose of the crystal's gift. This was only the beginning.